More and more, there are three things I find missing in network engineers. Three things that keep them from reaching the next level. Three things that will prevent them from becoming a top level engineer. These three things will set you apart from the rest. Want to learn what these three things are? Keep listening.
Do you want a career in cybersecurity? Are you unsure how to start? Curious what it means to be a cybersecurity professional? This is the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast with Dr. Jeff Colburn. He's a 30-year industry professional and the founder of Team Cavio, a company that specializes in helping people launch cyber careers. Join us on this podcast as we explore what it means to be a cybersecurity professional and how to get started. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Colburn. Well, it's been a while since my last episode, but I thought this season we'd focus on something a little different. Previously we were focusing on how to get into the industry, and a lot of what I'm going to share this season will continue to be helpful for those still trying to get their foot in the door, break into the industry. But what about those already working in the industry? What about the the mid levels, the junior engineers? What do they need to, take it to that next level, right? To, that could grow to next level and, on that pathway to becoming a top level engineer. So that's kind of what I want to talk about this season. Because, I noticed a few things. I'm still active in the industry. I still work as a network engineer, architect. And there's a few things I've been noticing more and more as I interact with other engineers. And it's more so now than ever before, is a lot of them don't even understand the technology they're implementing. They're putting in technology and they don't even know how it works. They just know how to configure it. And that's why even when they have an issue, they struggle to troubleshoot because they don't understand the technology. So I'm finding that more and more. And if they do have this technology implemented and it's working, a lot of times it's implemented poorly. Like they don't know how to design with it. So they got it up and running. And I've seen designs where I'm just scratching my head, like, why would you do this? And it's no fault of their own. Nobody taught them. So they managed to get up and running, but it's just designed poorly because nobody just taught them best design practices. And then other times I see technologies implemented when they didn't even need this technology. They overcomplicated their environment. They didn't properly capture their requirements. Vendor told them, well, hey, deploy this technology, and they did, and it's overkill. They added complexity where complexity is not needed. So they didn't know how to discern when to use certain technologies. So when you fail to articulate the requirements prior to implementation, you're putting in things that you may need, or you may be missing things that you need, and you might be adding things you don't need. And the other thing I noticed is very few have a holistic understanding of the entire network architecture. So when they do make a change, because they had to do a move, add, change, they might implement something that might break something upstream because they don't have that holistic view of the architecture. And like I said, I'm seeing this more and more as I work with network engineers. So I'll give you an example. So I met with this engineer. His title was network architect. So he was a top network engineer. He was responsible for the overall network infrastructure for this organization. So when I asked this person what underlay protocol they were using for their VXLAN fabric, he couldn't answer. He didn't know. He said he would have to check. Well, that's kind of scary if you're the architect and you don't even know what should be a very simple answer. What are you using? Are you using IS? Or are you using, BGP, right? So it just shows you that there's things missing in engineers today, and it's not entirely their fault. I just think the way the industry is today, the opportunity to learn is not there like it used to be. There's no mentoring. In the past, when you're a junior engineer, you sat in the cubicles next to the senior engineers, right? You heard them, right? You heard what they're talking about with the other senior engineers. They had a whiteboard. They'd be whiteboarding solutions. So you'd watch them whiteboard these solutions. You'd see how they're designing networks. You'd hear their selection process to what technology they would use based upon the customer's requirements, right? So you had this learning opportunity because you're like right there with the seniors, they're the guys ahead of you, and you would learn from them. I don't think we have that anymore with so much remote work. You know, I know as a senior engineer myself, I don't have the junior engineers around me like I used to in the past. I don't have the guys learning from me every day because I work remotely. So a lot of times I'm talking to the customer or I'm developing a solution before I talk to the customer. There's that process of coming up with it. There's not a junior there with me to learn from me. So yeah. So again, because it's working remotely, the opportunity's not there. The other thing I noticed is vendor certification exams are becoming more and more about how to implement technology on their platform instead of actually teaching the technology. Now there's some still out there, especially I notice more on the entry level. They're more about the technology, but you start getting to like these mid-level certification exams. It seems to be more about configuring that vendor's platform. What you start what you start developing is these engineers that know the commands that they need to configure a device, but they don't know what these commands do. or they, it's like, I know the commands, but what is it actually doing? They can't tell you. And they may not even know all the commands because a lot of times I see these engineers using the same notepad template over and over. And they just change the device specific information like host name and IP address, or at least you're hoping they are, because a lot of times something's missed. All of a sudden you have a duplicate host name, duplicate IP address, change doesn't work. They don't understand the technology, so they can't troubleshoot it. And so they have to back out of that change because it's like, okay, I submitted the commands that's supposed to make this work. It should work. So there's a couple of things I'm noticing is the lack of mentorship and vendor certification exams focusing on implementation and not teaching technologies like they used to. But a lot of people ask me, say, well, do I even need to know the technology? Because we're starting to automate things more and more. Well, that's really scary if you're telling me that you just want to execute a bunch of scripts and implement multiple changes across your infrastructure without understanding what's being done. That's really scary. Yeah, I'm all for automating. If you can stand up a VXLAN fabric in 4 minutes through running an Ansible playbook, I'm all for it. But if you don't understand what Ansible just did, that's scary. So you need to understand, like before you automate something, you need to understand what you're doing, because if automation doesn't go well and you blow up your infrastructure, uh, you're going to have a very long night trying to figure out what just happened. So I want to get back to the point of the season. What about the junior engineers? What about those mid-level guys that want to go to that next level? How do they next level their skill set? How do you grow to that top level engineer? Can they get there with their vendor certifications? Well, partly, right? I think that can be part of it, but I think there's some things missing. And I think there's a few things an engineer needs to know in order to go to that next level. And that's, understanding the technology. They need to know how to design with that technology. And they have to understand the reasons they would use that technology. And more importantly, why they wouldn't use that technology. Because that's another thing. When somebody's pushing a technology on you, you need to understand whether or not that's the right technology. Because it happens. The people are trying to push you to the next best thing, but it may not be what you need right now. So just because you know a technology doesn't mean you know how to design with it. And I tell you, I've seen it multiple times. I've seen a BGP design where they had a shared services VRF that became a transit VRF between two client VRFs because they didn't know how to control their BGP route advertisements, right? So they had all the routes flowing in and out of the shared service VRF to the tenant VRF. So, these two VRFs that shouldn't be talking to each other all of a sudden are communicating through the shared service VRF. Again, because person didn't know how to design with BGP. They got it up and running, right? They knew enough to configure BGP, but they didn't know how to design with it. I've seen SD-WAN implementations where, all the customer needed to do was clean up their routing, right? So, but somebody pushed them to SD-WAN thinking this is what you need to fix your WAN issues. Well, no, they just needed to clean up their routing. And honestly, SD-WAN just made it worse because the underlay was still a mess. And then you throw this overlay SD-WAN on top of a broken underlay network. So again, they're just sold the wrong technology when there was a simple solution: just clean up your routing. And like I said, I've seen technologies pushed on customers by vendors, and the engineers didn't know enough to push back because they didn't know any better. So they're just like, oh, the vendor's telling me this. This is what I need. This is what we're going to implement. And it's the wrong answer. It didn't fix the problem. It didn't address the requirements. It just now they got a new technology that they really don't understand how it works. So there's, like I said, there's a few reasons. Vendor certs lack design practices. They don't teach it. You would never design a production network like a CCIE lab. Probably a good way to get yourself fired because all the various protocols, all the redistribution, right? Because they're trying to test your knowledge on various things. So they have to throw it all in one lab environment, but certainly not how you would build a production network. So even at the highest level of the CCIE, that's not really teaching you design practices. It's teaching you technology. And then a lot of the online training I see focuses on these vendor certification tracks. So again, they're not really teaching network design. They're just teaching you the technologies or how to implement it on the vendor platform to pass that certification. So I think those are, kind of a couple things that are missing. But so what do engineers need, right? They need a mentor, right? They need a mentor to teach them best design practices. And when I say best design practices, I'm talking about, how do I capture requirements? How do I select technologies? How do I develop that high level design? How do I build a low level design? And how do I migrate? Because it's very rare that you get a greenfield environment. Usually there's an old network and you're trying to get it to a new network. So there's that in between, right? You got to migrate from old to new. So you have to develop that migration strategy without breaking anything. So that's what I mean by best design practices. So you need that mentor. Engineers need that mentor. But just knowing how to design, that's not even enough. You have to know the reasons you would or wouldn't use a technology. Like if you're building a small data center, it's not going to go beyond 2 spine switches. You may not need to build out a VXLAN fabric, right? Just because you're hearing about other organizations deploying VXLAN doesn't mean that you should, right? Because most of the times the people you're hearing about are these large organizations building large data centers. So VXLAN fabric makes sense to them, but you may just still need to continue to build out traditional data center, right? The same as with SD-WAN. If all you need is a centralized orchestrator and zero-touch provisioning, you don't need SD-WAN, right? But you need to know the reasons why. When would I need to use SD-WAN, and when don't I need it, right? So again, understanding technology, understanding best design practices, and knowing the reasons to use technology. To me, those are the big three. I think those are the things that make for a strong network engineer. So that's what I want to talk about this season: how technologies work, how to design with them, and the reasons we use them. So that I think this is going to be really helpful. I think this is what a lot of juniors and mid-level engineers need to go to the next level. I think it's something that's missing in the industry. And I'm hoping through this podcast, we can kind of start filling that gap and helping people find that way to that next level, start them to develop that deeper understanding of technology, how to design with it, and when to use it. So I'm excited about this season. I think it's going to be really useful, especially even today, this morning. Another friend of mine who runs a business, he's telling me they're facing more layoffs. So it seems like you hear more and more about layoffs. So how are you going to differentiate yourself? Like how are you going to stand out from the many, right? So I think these three things especially the engineers I'm encountering, if you know the technology, you know how to design it, and you know the reasons to use it, you're going to stand apart from a lot of the people out there. And I think that's going to make you, you're going to make you the engineer that people want to retain or people are going to want to hire. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've been an architect for some very well-known organizations, but I wouldn't have been able to do it without knowing these three things. And, how did I get there? Well, one, my CCIE journey, right? That brought me to, understand technology at a much higher level, right? Just, what I had to study, the level I had to study to pass my CCIE, over 20, nearly 23 years ago. That brought me my technology understanding to a level that I was never at before. So, and I continue to study at that level. So that's where I cover that technology piece, that technology knowledge. But then I had great mentors ahead of me. I grew up as an engineer when I still had senior engineers sitting around me. So I learned proper design practices. I learned from them, and then I was able to build upon it just from my experiences of being drawn into other designs, just learning that whole design process from them and, using it over and over as I got brought into bigger and bigger projects, right? So again, but it was those mentors who got me started. And then understanding the technologies, like how to, when to use them and when not to use them, right? And that has a lot to do with, capturing requirements. Because once I understand the requirements, then I can understand my knowledge in the technologies. I'll know, well, based upon these requirements, this technology is going to best meet that requirement. So those are the three things I want to talk about. How technologies work, how to design with them, when to use them. Worked for me. I think it's still going to work today. I wish I ran into more engineers out there that were like this, that actually knew what I was talking about when I describe a technology, when I talked about how to design with it and when they should or shouldn't use it. I'm telling you, just from my own experience, I'm not running into them like I used to. So I think there's an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity for people that want to grow as engineers to take it up to that next level and really stand apart from the flock. So I want to thank you all for listening. Please join me in the coming weeks as we dive deeper into this. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please share with a friend who may be interested in becoming a cyber professional. Also, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. Your feedback is greatly appreciated as it will shape our future episodes. Meet us here every Monday as we discuss the cyber job market and how to launch your career. Until next time, have a great week.